Moving forward.
Reticulating splines? Oh wait, that's a different
Reticulating
thing.
splines. I remember SimCity 2000. Uh, um, all right, I think the stream is live. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to this. After the war, we're going to play tabletop role playing games. Yay!
Yay!
Hey.
I am Christiana Ellis. I'm going to be the game master tonight for this session 0 of After the War. This a science fiction role playing game of memetic horror. You can tell because it says so right here on the cover of the book. This is from Genesis of Legend Publishing. It written by Alistair Stewart and Jason Piter. I'm not sure 100% about the pronunciation there. But you can buy it at places like DriveThruRPG, etc. But I backed it on the Kickstarter when that happened, and I've been excited to run it ever since. So with me tonight to do just that, Paul Weimer. I just realized, for some reason I was second guessing, like, is it supposed to? Because you do the Prince Justin with the V, and so suddenly I'm thinking, is it supposed to be Weimer? I don't know why.
It's Weimer or Weimer. I answer to either.
All right.
Or
either.
We've also got Nobilis Reed,
Hello.
Lee Burdett,
Hey.
and David. What? I never pronounce everybody's last name. This is so weird. I've been playing games.
Archambault.
Archambault. There you go. All right.
And hello.
These are folks that I've been playing games with for a while, but this is the first time playing this game with this group of people, so introductions are in order. So we are tonight going to be playing, as I mentioned, a session 0, which means that we're going to go through kind of the introduction of the game, generally how the mechanics work, and then we're going to be creating characters and a settlement in order to play next week. With that under our belts, let's talk a little bit about what is the premise of this game. What is the basic idea? We have a nice little intro right here that says, hello, darkness, my old friend. All of you came to Polvo looking for a new beginning. You came from somewhere else. The decadence of old Terra, the discipline of Mars, the freedom of the Belt, or an alien world. You survived the terrible galactic war which marked your body and soul. A war against an infectious idea, a memetic virus known as the Song. You came to Polvo looking for a refuge, a hope, and an opportunity. You thought you were joining a community of strangers and built a home. But terrible things lurk in the wreckage of the war and the shadows of your minds. It's up to you to keep your people safe. After the war. Boom, boom, boom. So, there is the plot, so to speak, of the setting. But what this game is all about, really, I'm trying to recall who I've heard say it specifically, but many people have echoed this idea, which is that role-playing games are about the things that they reward you for doing. So, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, you get experience from going places, doing things, and usually killing stuff. And that's where you get XP, and that's how you level up your character. And so that's what the game mechanics essentially encourage you to do. In this game, what the mechanics encourage you to do is, in each scene that we create, you will have created beliefs for your character, something your character feels strongly about, but is potentially a debatable or controversial idea. And we're going to have scenes where we are exploring how those beliefs shape their actions in the actual world they find themselves in. And we're going to evaluate after every scene whether or not that belief was supported or confronted. Like, did your actions lead to you being extra sure that's what you believe, or maybe are you starting to doubt, right? And those questions, whether you examine that belief one way or the other, is how you get points of insight, which is how things advance. So that's the basic concept of what the mechanics are, is that we're going to tell a story, but the story is designed to have you confront and examine the beliefs that your character has. So let's talk a little bit about this idea. We covered it a little bit in the beginning thing, and I'm not going to read all of this, but the basic idea is that we have a far future alien, spacefaring civilization that includes Earth, Mars, the Belt, and then through faster than light travel, a variety of different alien worlds and races that have all had contact with one another, and for the most part peaceful. Kind of you could imagine some Star Trek in there. But part of what happens is the song, which is this, it's like a contagious idea expressed as music that basically overrides people's free will and promises total peace and harmony at the cost of abandoning all of your individuality and conforming only to what the song wants. And it's contagious. All you have to do is hear it, or even see it transmitted in forms like a Morse code blink of it is enough to start to infect your brain, and it can start to take you over. And it's a gradual process, but just about everybody is vulnerable to it. And this ran rampant throughout all of known civilizations. It looked really bad, like everyone was just going to be rendered extinct by this enormous fleet of ships known as the chorister fleet, like from a choir, where the believers of the song traveling all over to convert everyone they can find. And it looked bad, like we were going to lose, and everyone in the universe would be converted. But eventually they discovered a way to fight back, and they created essentially a counter virus that would transmit the same way that the song does, so that it could be spread within the people who are already infected with the song to essentially disable it. And it worked at the cost of 1/3 of the people infected with the Tormenta virus turning into essentially animalistic, violent murder monsters. So you defeat the song, but lose a whole bunch of other people in the process. And in the meantime, huge swaths of the known civilization have been devastated by this enormous war. And now, here on this world of Polvo, people are just trying to pick up the pieces. That's the basic concept, right? And so the thing is, even though the war itself is over, lingering influence from the song is still out there, and frankly, so is the Tormenta virus. And so you constantly have to be on the lookout for the influence of either one. And the problem is that the early signs of either of those things can be easily mistaken for ordinary human nature behavior. So, for example, if someone is urging you to go along with what everyone else does because that's really better for the group, that might be the song's influence. If someone is saying, hey, look, I just like to do things my own way and take care of me and mine first, that might be the Tormenta virus influence. Or maybe it's just an ordinary person who has their own thoughts and feelings. The problem is, if it's the influence of one or the other, it can develop and become more intense and more contagious. So, everyone's just trying to build a new life for themselves, knowing that those threats still remain out there. So, does that sound like a fun premise setting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's a really cool idea. And thoughts, questions about that?
No.
From the page you're just on, I got kind of the concept of my character.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
Scientist. Scientist.
Sure.
Working for Black Sky Industries.
Well, there are a number of options that you're going to have along those lines, so that's cool. So definitely, as you guys start to think of your ideas, that's great. We're going to develop those more fully in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of how gameplay works. Let me switch away from this screen to the character sheets here, and I'm going to zoom in on just one of these. These are blank character sheets for right now, but we're just going to talk through the different things that are on here and how they work. So, whoops. So, on this, we, of course, have character name, the character beliefs, which we're going to talk more about in a moment, but it is, as I said, you define what your character's beliefs are, and then after each scene, we determine were those beliefs either affirmed or refuted in that scene. Character convictions are basically like leveled up beliefs. They are less subject to doubt. Your character is extra sure, they have an unshakable belief in those things. Now, on the one hand, you could put that as it's something you believe in so strongly that you can really no longer examine it critically. You believe it always under all circumstances, and you're not really open to rethinking it. But because of the nature of the threat, it can undermine and take advantage of doubts you have. And so having a conviction rather than just a belief renders you less susceptible to some of the corrupting influences of the song or tormenta. And so that's the advantage of the conviction. And when we talk about mechanics in a moment, that'll make even more sense. Companion beliefs is just an area where, as you start to, that would be your own reference, just for of what the other player characters believe. It is not a belief about that character necessarily. It is just a spot to put for your own reference what their beliefs are. It's less important when we have everyone's character sheets on the screen together. This little triangle guy here in the middle is where you track your points of insight. So in a scene where you have successfully confronted one of your beliefs, you will be given a point of insight that you could get potentially 2 per scene, 1 for each of your beliefs if you cover both of those. Welcome. We got J Trooper 501 rating the channel. Welcome. So the points of insight, if you have 2 beliefs, you're going to be able to get potentially up to 2 points of insight per scene. But when you get to 3, you get to have a moment of discovery. And then when you get to 6, you have another moment of discovery. When you get to 9, you have a moment of growth. And we'll talk more about what those are in a moment. And now, next down here, we're going to have where your traits go. And the traits are going to be your origin, and then a sub-option of the origin, and your war story, and then a sub-option of the war story, and then your profession, and a sub-option of the profession. And from each of those, there are 3 subjects that are related to that. And that'll make more sense in a moment when we look at them. But each of those trait options has 3 words associated with it, and that's what you write in this spot. And what that means is that anytime you're doing a roll that is related to one of the words that you have on your trait, you get an extra die. And so that's how that works. And so in a moment, when we start looking at these pages that show what are the different origin choices, each of them is going to have 3 words associated with it. That's what those are, and that's what would go here. And then at the bottom of the sheet, we have your strain. And what that is a mechanic that you can use strain to re-roll dice, on in a roll where you might be about to lose. You can also get strain by, if you have a conflict that needs to be resolved with dice, if you win, you take strain. Because it's essentially a balance of, on the one hand, if you lose, then you already lose. That's already the penalty. The story is already going in a different way than you wanted, right? But if you win, you still had the stress of having to go through the conflict to get what you want, and so you take strain. And what taking strain does is if you have 1 point of strain, you mark the little 1 here, and what that means is anytime your die rolls a 1, you don't count it.
Ooh.
If you get 2 points of strain, now anytime you roll a die and it has a 1 or a 2, doesn't count. Start getting 3. Now 1s, 2s, and 3s don't count. You can see how that can start to limit your effectiveness pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right? If you and that's where the moments of discovery come in. Is when you have a moment of discovery, when you've reached one through getting enough insight, the character who reaches it and earns the moment of discovery, we have a special scene where they get to ask one of the other player characters a question about that character and what they believe and what they think and what's their background and all that sort of thing. You ask a question, and you can have like a little micro scene about that question where we get to learn more about those two characters, and then both of them get to clear a point of stress. Both characters.
Oh.
And so that's how you clear stress in this game. Likewise, if you reach 6 strain, that means somebody's going to die. It doesn't have to be your player character, but if it's not them, it has to be someone else important to the story. And then after that happens, you have a moment of grief, which is a different kind of micro scene where everyone kind of reacts to the loss of whichever character has died, and then everyone can clear stress. Or strain, rather. So those are the basic mechanics. But we're going to have lots of scenes, and we'll talk more about how scenes work in a little bit. But basically, that's the game, is that we have scenes. You're intended to try to shape the scene to control both the narrative and also confront or examine your beliefs, gain insight, and we move the story forward. That's basically how the game works. There's no combat in the D&D sense. It's more a matter of we have a scene where everyone is just cooperating on what's happening in the scene until we reach a point where two people can't agree on what should happen next. And then we resolve that with the dice and then proceed. So that's the basic idea. Now, each time we have a scene, the basic idea here, and like I can put the book back up and talk a little bit about you know what? Here we go. So in a scene, we have 3 people involved at the start of a scene. First person establishes the platform, and that's like the setting and the time in which the scene is taking place. As the game master, usually that will be me establishing the platform of the scene. And so that just means the setting for the scene, not the inciting incident. Because then, after establishing the platform, I will choose one of you to do the tilt. And that means you say, based on that setting, here's why the scene is happening. Here's what happens in that location that establishes why a scene should happen here. And so, for example, I might say the platform is a busy food market where sellers are selling all sorts of wares. It's very crowded. It looks like a storm's going to blow in later, so people are kind of hurrying to get their shopping done before the storm comes in. And then I'll say, pick one of you to do the tilt, and the tilt there might be someone, a stranger, comes in and starts wandering through the crowd humming.
Oh, jeez.
Does that mean that this is and so then the third person chosen by the second person will ask what is the question of the scene. And so with that setup, the question of the scene might be, you know, is this person a threat to the settlement? It could be, how did this person, or, you know, like what happens to this person, right? You know, it could just be straightforward, but the idea is defining what will the end of this scene be. Is it, you know, once that question has been resolved, the scene is over. So it's essentially saying, you know, this is what the scene is going to be about. When will we know it's over? When we have answered the question. And so that'll take some practice for all of us to kind of decide on that, but that's the basic concept. And so we proceed where everyone is either in actor mode, meaning their character is in that scene, or in audience mode, which means that you are going to collaboratively be filling in details of the environment and the setting. You might get to play some of the NPCs, and then at the end, you are the audience is who gets to decide whether the beliefs were adequately confronted enough to get points of insight. And so that's the basic mechanic, is that we do a scene. If the scene gets to a point where there is question about what's going to happen, like the player character wants one thing and the NPCs want something else and they can't come to a compromise, then we resolve it with the dice. And that might or might not answer the question of the scene. If it doesn't, then we keep going. If it does, then the scene is done, right? And then once the scene is over, we look at the beliefs of the characters who are in the scene and say, did we confront those beliefs? Did we repudiate those beliefs? And we decide how many points of insight to be awarded. And we do that for each character who is in the scene. NPCs don't count, just player characters. And that's the basic structure of the game. Any questions there? Like, a lot of that'll obviously become more clear as we start to do it. But does that, anyone have any questions so far?
Not so far.
Not so far.
All right. Now, one of the things that I think is neat in the book here, this chapter 2, Survivor Stories, basically what it is it's kind of like examples of character concepts where it's framed as they're being interviewed. Like, they are a new arrival on Polvo and they're being interviewed. Like, what's your deal? Where are you from? How did you experience the war? What are you doing now? And it's basically just concepts of what a character might be about, right? And it's got some world building detail in here too. And so in this context, the little, part of it's being blocked by the profile pictures here, but there we go. If you see in the bottom corner here, this character, you know, these are their 6 traits, like we're going to see on our character. So origin, and then origin sub option, war story is silence, and then sub option, and so on. And so that's how everyone's character works. And so this chapter is not really mechanics at all. It's just more like examples of types of characters you might consider. But we're not going to spend a lot of time just reading those right now. But so let's get into character creation. New beginnings. So what we're going to do for all of these characters is first decide on your origin. And in this context, origin is not necessarily about anything like race, with the caveat that, like, 4 of the 5 options are humans from various different locations. And then the 5th option is alien, where you basically are one of 5 different kinds of aliens. So those are from their own places. And then War Story is going to be, well, we'll talk more about each of these as we go. So let's just start right here with Origin. So the 4 choices here, Terran, born and raised on Earth, and then Martian, born on Martian soil, part of that terraforming effort, domed cities and so on. Belter, raised in 0G in the belt. People who are fans of The Expanse will probably find all 3 of those things very familiar. And it's, you know, I think the influence is strong there, but it's good. It allows kind of shorthand if you happen to know that series. And then Alien, there are different alien species that are all involved in this whole setting here. And so you notice under situations right here. So for Terran, culture, history, nature. Mars, we got corporations, finances, hierarchy. And those are the 3 words that I was talking about. So on your character sheet, if you chose Terran as your first option, you would write Terran, you know, right here, and under those 3 little black 3 black diamonds there, that's where you would write culture, history, nature. And what that means is, if you get to a point where you are doing conflict with the dice, and you can argue how, well, this is a conflict about, you know, the interface of different cultures, then you get an extra die.
Okay, that's for all the situations or just the ones that are traits?
So, if you are Terran,
Right.
culture, history, nature. Those
Yeah,
are
those...
the 3 situations for that trait.
Okay.
So your origin of Terran is 1 trait, and it has culture, history, nature. And then from there, the options that you see here next to that, those are your second trait, the sub option of Terran. And each of those has its own 3 words. So this is
I see.
Yeah. So like this is a slightly new mechanic. So it's reasonable to have questions about it. So that's the basic idea. So just to start with here, we would have. Hang on, let me get back to on that screen. So you have Terran, Martian, Belter, or Alien, and you would choose that, and that's your first trait, and then you would write the 3 associated words. The second trait is you would be choosing one of the things under options here. And then there's more information about each of those here. So for example, Terran, here's those 5 choices again, but now you see each of them has a little bit more description of it, and it has its own new 3 words, right? So if you were Terran, you have culture, history, and nature, and if you choose political community, then you also have politics, governance, and communications. Whereas if you were Terran, faithful community, you still have culture, history, nature, but now you have ethics, faith, technology, or theology. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, I'm getting it.
Yeah, and so versus if you are Martian, then you choose your second trait from this list. If you are Belter, you choose your second trait from this list, and so on. And so you'll have the 3 words that are associated with your origin, and the 3 words that are associated with your, well, I'm calling them words. We should probably call them situations because that's what the book calls it. But you have the 3 situations from this page, and then based on whichever one you choose here, you have the additional 3 situations. And we're going to come back to this in a moment, so don't be in a hurry to pick everything right away. But for aliens, the different races that we've got that we're dealing with primarily here is we have the Permancers, which are they're a very advanced race, but they're small in number. And they were the only species of any kind that anyone knew about that was totally immune to both the Song and the Tormenta. but they didn't have the numbers to be able to actually win the war on their own. So they were trying to help, and they have advanced technology, but they are relatively small in number. The Illuvia are basically like post-organic clouds of floating mirrors aliens, but they can also actually sort of they can cohabitate with the brain of like a human, where they sort of share the body, and that is a temporary thing, and generally it's only done with a willing person who specifically like signs a contract to say, I'm signing up to be a vassal with this specific Illuvia for this period.
Mind-sharing Organians.
Yeah. And then the Mercurio are basically like shapeshifters. Like they're sort of vaguely humanoid, but they change their shape and mannerisms all over. The Ursa are basically humanoid bears. And note, they are one of the only ones that have a fourth situation right here, and it is unbearable puns. So yeah, so they have some of their own unique cultural things too. And then there's the Fundar, or the Riven, and that's what this little picture is of. So you could maybe say they're slightly like bird people, sort of that sort of thing. But one of the interesting things about those is that they are a species that were kind of artificially divided into two because of a bioweapon where half the population got one strain and half got the other strain. And neither strain is fatal unless someone with the alpha strain and someone with the omega strain ever actually are in close contact with each other, in which case the two strains work together and kill both people. So basically, this species kind of artificially has to stay permanently separated based on which strain of the virus they have. All right. So the third and fourth traits are your war story. And what that means is there's basically 4 phases of the war. That the overtures, like when it was just starting to happen, the song is just starting to invade and infiltrate. The crescendo is when all seems terrible. The song is taking over everything. It's going really, really bad. It looks dire. The dissonance is when we finally figure out how to fight back with the Tormenta, and there's a lot of conflict happening at that point. And then silence is the period once the war has essentially been won, question mark, but everyone's still kind of trying to figure out what's next, right? And so basically, you're going to choose from each of those, like, what is the experience you had the war that it most shaped who you are? And so you can see, if you chose, for example, Overture, just like with Origin, you have 3 situations that you choose. And then you further choose one of the 5 different options, and they're each going to have their own 3 situations. And so, for example, in Overture, Feynman Sentinels, you were one of the first staff on Feynman Station, the first outpost to hear the song. While you didn't hear the song, you saw what happened to your friends and colleagues who did. Or you were one of the staff on Feynman Station. That alien melody seized your mind and bound you to its will, turning you against your friends and colleagues. You only escaped after Tormenta was unleashed at the end of the war, right? So the idea is you choose one of those, and it is based on what you think was the most influential on your experience of the war. And that's what the third and fourth trait are. And then profession, it produces the 5th and 6th trait. And so you have 4 basic categories of builder, veteran, leader, and scholar, and each of those has its own subcategories and works just like the others. So essentially, the process of building your character, what you're going to do is you're going to choose an origin, a war story, and a profession. And from each of those, you choose one of the options for those. And then you write on your character sheet the 3 situations associated with all 6 of those traits. Does that all make sense? Okay. So basically, that's what we're going to do now. But feel free to kind of talk about that, ask questions about it. If you're starting to feel like you already know what you want them to be, we can start to talk about that. But that's basically going to be the next phase of the stream here, is less about me just lecturing how the game works and more about let's talk about building characters.
Yay!
Sound good?
Yeah.
One of the things here too, just to, because the next bit is going to be about creating the beliefs, but also names. It has some, this page has some common names for the different sort of origins that you might pick if you're having trouble thinking of a name. Obviously, you
Okay.
can have a name be whatever you want, but this just offers some examples.
Yeah. Can I just break in and say the art in this core book is absolutely gorgeous?
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
And my understanding is that a lot of these profiles are actually based on real people who either contributed to the project or I don't know if they were all like Kickstarter backers or maybe they're just friends or whatever. But just for example, if I skip all the way to I know it's right at the end. So see. Here we have Alistair Stewart and Jason Piter, and I don't know Jason, but that is approximately what Alistair looks like.
So, yeah.
So, so I think a lot of those pictures are actually based on real people, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. There's a lot of fun artwork in this book.
Yeah. I mean, even just the body art on the characters and just their faces and everything is absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone thinking you might pick an alien?
I don't think I am, personally.
Not unless everybody picks the other humans, and it just seems to be the logical thing to
Well, the
round
thing
out
is,
a group.
because
I do want a variety of experiences for all of us. So
well, but the thing is too, the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth traits offer enough variety that you could have two Terrans and they could be still very different characters.
fair.
Basically, because you have 3 situations for each trait, you have a total of 18 traits. So in principle, 2 Terrans might only have 3 traits in common out of 18.
Well, it looks like David and Nobilis already have staked out Terran and Belter. So what are you thinking, Lee?
I was actually thinking Belter as well, but I was also thinking Martian, so I can do Martian.
I was also thinking Martian, as it so happens.
Points of commonality between characters are not a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, I mean, gives them something in common potentially. Like that.
Until you use the niche protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like, this is not a game where you have to worry about like, oh well, who's going to be the tank? This is not a game where that matters.
Cleric.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I mean, in some respects, because the mechanics of the game, what they're ultimately all about is you decide on something that your character believes in, and then you kind of confront and examine those beliefs. The idea that 2 characters have very similar backgrounds but maybe believe different things could actually be a good source of, drama for that sort of mechanic. All right.
Yeah. All right, then I'm going to go with.
Names are always last.
Yeah. That's usually how I do it too.
Yeah.
And here, the first thing I put on the sheet was the character name.
Right. So obviously we've got. I'm looking at the stream. So we've got. A few of you are starting to fill it in. I think as you. I don't want to necessarily make you guys talk while you're thinking about those things, but.
No, but that's better than just a silent stream. So.
Well, no, so what I can absolutely do is I can talk a little bit for the stream, more detail about some of these options that we're talking about while you guys work on that. So I don't want to make you guys, I'm not rushing any of you. I'll just talk a little bit more detail about these, and then once someone feels like they are ready with their character, then we'll kind of talk through that and sound good.
Yep.
Well, I think I'm actually to the point where there's not much else we've covered that I know to.
Okay.
Wait.
So
Apparently my Roll20 connection's been interrupted, so
oh.
Oh.
Well, like the version of the sheet we have on there, it looks like you've got 5 out of 6 of the traits on there.
I have physicist as the final part.
Okay. Yeah,
which
that
is
hasn't
energy.
been updated here, but yeah. So I guess we'll try to get that rebooted. Uh-oh. Looks like David might be frozen actually. So oh. Yeah, we just lost him on the call. Hopefully he'll be reconnecting shortly. Is everyone else kind of still plugging along?
Yep.
All right, cool. So there
They
we
had
go.
me at explosives.
Big bada boom. Another
Yeah.
dangerous character from you, Lee.
Welcome
Yes.
back, David. So
Okay, I'm back.
yeah, welcome back. So looks like you have picked Terran. So that gives you the culture, history, and nature. Well, here, how about you? I let you describe what you picked and why, and how you
Okay.
start to visualize your character.
I chose Terran, which culture, history, nature. He grew up on Earth. He was but he grew up. His mother was a teacher. He grew up basically in a university, and as such, he knows research, debate, teaching. And in the war, and because of how I was raised, getting a job as a researcher, as doing science, that was simple. But so when the war started, he was of course on the front lines of getting fighting it through science. And what really came up was near the end, where he he was part of the team developing Tormenta, and he was there when it was first deployed, and it was some of the people when it was being deployed that showed the downside of it, where they turn into beasts basically, and that is what sticks in his mind every single day.
Yeah.
Seeing that transformation.
There's a lot of in this setting. There was a lot of very difficult decisions that had to be made at that point because, of course, the threat is literally existential for entire civilizations, but at the same time, some of what was done in the name of trying to find a way to fight it are things that are not necessarily easy to live with.
Yeah. And on Polvo, he's yet again leveraging his science background to help in that way, and he's more of a technology in what he does now.
Nice. Sounds good. So, of course, the situations you've got, we talked about culture, history, nature. For academic community, you got research, debate, teaching. For dissonance, you have sacrifice, anger, tormenta, because you're on this project working with that. And then the stolen plans phase of that, which was, hang on, there we go. Stolen plans, which in here is, you were on the final vessel to leave Earth, the lucky few, which carried scientists and secret research. Your weapon carried the plans for a living nanotech weapon, the anti-song Project Static. and that gives you scientists smuggling nanotech. For scholar, you have research, analysis, and debate. Physicist, energy experiments, xenotech. All sounds pretty good. And has anyone else got all 6 of their traits chosen? Looks
Not
like
yet.
we
Working
got
on it.
in progress. Oh, Nobilis, it looks like are you just about there or? Oh, you're muted, I think. Muted in the Google Hangout.
Sorry, I had to find the right window. There was
Yeah,
a
I know.
bunch of windows. Yeah. The my character Sasha is a belter, and has always lived in small groups. What amounts to kind of synthetic families. Um, uh, at a fairly young age, he's not a terribly old character, and at a fairly young age, his natural born family was ripped apart by the chaos of the early part of the war, um, and grew up in the conflict of it, and learned early on just to trust the people directly around him, and has a strong feeling of a need to belong, but not in these broader questions of culture, but his loyalties are to the people around him. And he's a fighter and um, uh, a and a feels responsible for and responsible to the people around him.
Okay, great. So we've got you. You've chosen Belter, and then from there, the marshals are straddling the difficult roles of government, judge, authority figure, and designated adult. To kind of
Right.
try to keep things under control as much as can be in a place like the Belt. And then
Yeah.
for silence, which as we mentioned is kind of the picking up the pieces, what next phase of the war, you chose echoes. You saw the signs, the slight resonances in the hydrogen of Polvo's seas, the strange behavior of the wildlife. You are one of the few who realizes that the song lurks in the shadows. You want to talk about that a little bit? What made you choose that?
Well, Sasha's role during the war was as a sentinel, a long distance recon type person, very kind of out. His job was alertness. His job was seeing things, and he can't stop being. He has a hard time letting his guard down. So that's why I chose Echoes there.
Well, and one of the big themes of this game, of course, is that a lot of characters have some buried traumas associated with their time in the war, and I would imagine long distance recon, when the sorts of threats that you're dealing with are things like the song, where it is you're so potentially vulnerable to if you do find evidence of the song, you literally could be affected by it if you're not careful enough. And so the idea of the hypervigilance that someone might have, even trying to come out of that situation, could certainly imagine that lingering.
Right, but one of the but the what is the word I'm looking for? Paradox of it is that very often hypervigilance isolates people from the people around them. In the sense of the hypervigilance that comes from PTSD and stuff like that, because they have a hard time. But what Sasha understands is that he has to open himself up to the people around him in order to be able to see, so that not only can he see if there's someone else is influenced, but they can see if he is.
Yeah, that would definitely be important in this context. But also, is a desire to be with other people and in a community with them, is that subtle influence from the song?
Well, I mean, his personal opinion is that as long as that circle isn't too big,
Yeah.
then that's the middle ground.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I mean, that's good. Like, but you know, I'm just poking at it because that's kind of part of the whole tension of the setting, right?
Oh yeah,
It's
I mean,
constantly everyone having to second guess every impulse they have.
right, but he's trying to find a way to turn the tightrope into a plank. Right. That's what he's trying to do.
If just for anyone watching, if I briefly look distracted, like looking down like there, it's because my dog is asleep, dreaming by my chair. He's making little, you know,
Puppy.
barky, whimpery noises.
Aw.
And then for your profession, veteran and sentinel, which are both kind of along the same lines of what you were just saying. So your situation.
I hope it's okay that I kind of changed the order around, that the profession was kind of during the war and the
that's totally fine. But I guess the question would just be, what your profession and so on is like. It could be that's what you did during the war, but it also, the profession right now should reflect what are you doing now on Polvo. Now, if what you're doing on Polvo is you're the one who's kind of going out and checking out the places that need to be checked out, making sure that, you know, things are safe, you know, place is safe before you send in the salvaging team, or, you know, that sort of thing.
That's absolutely what he's doing.
Yeah. So, like, it's fine for that to have been what they do during the war, but the profession traits should also reflect what are you doing now on Polvo.
Right. Well, it's what he's good at. So.
Yeah. All right. Great. Yeah. So, do you want to go next, Lee?
Sure. My character's name is Epsilon, no last name. I'm going to start with where she was during the war. She was in the Crescendo. Okay. So working on the Ort line as part of the defenses in that first push. But
so just because I'm sorry, I
no, it's fine.
Just for the people who don't have the book and everything in front of them, just some of this additional setting flavor. So, you know, the Ort line war story includes you fought on the Ort line, the solar system spanning ring of automated defenses which stood between Earth and the Great Choir. You were one of the 7,500 volunteers who survived the confrontation, and your efforts allowed millions to evacuate the inner planets.
And what I'm building off of that is that once that fell, because I'm guessing that it fell.
It did.
Once that fell, she ended up in the belts again, and from there, that's where she joined Bradbury Weeps, because mega corporations should not be taking advantage of the situation. It's just a non-starter for her. This is not why I fought. And so she joined Bradbury Weeps as a member of the resistance.
So explain a little bit about what Bradbury Weeps is, because obviously people who don't have the book
Yeah.
don't have any know.
Yeah, the resistance for Bradbury Weeps is Mars Corp is the monolithic engine that will take humanity to the next stage of their evolution. As a member of Bradbury Weeps, you were the sand in the gears. You were part of the resistance to the tyrannical corporate dystopia and have Martian blood on your hands. So, not only did she fight on the Oort Cloud, but she also fought against, I'm guessing, the security people that worked for Mars Corp. And so with sabotage and explosions and wahahaha, and fighting against that, I think she ended up.
So one note is, though, that is pre-war, not post-war.
Oh, okay, that's pre-war.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, then let's reverse it, because I was actually going the opposite direction. But I think she joined the resistance to get out of that whole situation. Maybe it was too hot for her, and so she joined as a member of she volunteered for the Oort line to get out of that situation, and now she's on Polvo as a builder, trying to build a better society and a better world for basically everybody, because we didn't do it right the first 3 times.
Yeah.
let's see if fourth time's the charm.
Sure. So as a belter, you have salvage, scarcity, disputes, resistance. You have explosives, sabotage, hacking, crescendo, violence, grief, refugees, weapons, repairs, sacrifice, and then builder, of course, projects, coordination, toil, war, salvage, electronics, barter.
Yeah.
Pretty good. All right. Are you ready, Paul?
I am ready.
All right. Let's talk about Alan Cross.
Alan Cross is one of those Martian scum that Lee's character doesn't like so much. Alan comes from a long family of people who've served in space navies and as fighter pilots going back generations. So he joined the Martian Navy at a young age and it basically pilots small to medium-sized ships. At least he did. When the war came, he was at the Crescendo, at the Oort line, trying to save what remnants of humanity he could with his piloting skills and working the automated defenses. After that, coming to this new world, he still hasn't found a new path, so he just continues to use his piloting skills because someone's got to fly the ships, and there's a giant big world out there, and people have to get to places, and he's the person. You can't take the skies from him to steal from Firefly.
Yeah. So, like, this is a perfect example of what we were saying a moment ago, which is what can be interesting about overlap stuff, right? Because Crescendo and Oort Line you share with Lee's character Epsilon, but coming from opposite sides in the pre-war tensions.
Yes.
So she was literally one of the resistance against Mars Corp's efforts, the organization that you served, and so would, for that reason, tend to have hostility towards one another, except then you both volunteered when there was a war that threatened both sides equally. And, sometimes when a war has killed 80% of the galactic population and you're trying to pick up the pieces afterwards, maybe those old battle lines don't matter so much anymore. Maybe they still do.
I mean, there's only 7,500 people who survived the Oort line, and we are 2 of them. And we're 2 very different people.
Yeah. So, I think that's actually, can be really interesting in terms of, like, you have, very different initial backgrounds, but then this real war story commonality.
Yeah. And my character is also opposed to Sasha because he was the cops. So he probably would have been against the resistance for causing trouble and blowing stuff up and
Well, not necessarily. We don't want to necessarily put that on Nobilis's character. I would say probably some of the marshals were like that, but the marshals, as it's described in the setting book, are not a very uniform organization.
No, yeah, yeah, the marshals, as I see them, are are
It's like less.
they're not an
police and more-
organization. They're a group of people who have a reputation as being able to come in as with an outside perspective and settle disputes. Okay, and more often than not, they are. I mean, if you look at what they do, you know what their words are. They're not. They are finding people. They are finding people, finding facts, and I see their role much more as, there's some dispute in a Belter community of some kind, and they're called in by the community rather than imposing their will from outside, which would be much more like how a Martian community would work.
So I think, if I may offer a possible parallel, in all of the protests we've seen lately here in our real world, maybe the marshals are less the police and more the protesters who have taken it upon themselves to try to watch out for anyone who is agitating and trying to incite violence and trying to, calm those people down and try to take care of, when things get rough, it's like, here's how we, the people who are going to try to take charge and organize to get people to safety and that sort of thing.
okay.
Maybe? Yes?
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
That's much more how I see it, because otherwise it becomes just a mirror of Mars, and why have two of them
Right.
running the same way?
Yeah, I think that, well, and again, it's like, who knows? It could be that there were some people who were marshals who were more like that. Maybe they actually collaborated with Mars Corp and worked with them and did what Mars Corp wanted, but not all of them were, and so you could still potentially have a belief about the marshals in general that doesn't necessarily apply to Sasha, right? But it also could be that belief doesn't even apply to most marshals. And so that's where we're actually going to start talking about the beliefs a little bit. So we've covered everybody's characters, right? Like I didn't forget anybody or anything, right? So now we are going to, each of you need to create 2 beliefs. And one of the things that's important about that is that the whole game mechanic is about having the scenes confront these beliefs and to either confirm or refute them. And so you need something that's going to come up, right? And so a belief about a historical event that is unlikely to ever be relevant again is not useful for this game. So what we want is something that is likely to come up. Now, to some extent, that's partly my job as a GM, is to have events develop such that your beliefs are confronted, so to speak. But that's part of what we're looking for here. It describes it here in the book as saying a belief is a subjective, controversial declaration. So you need to be saying something. When you write your belief, what you're writing is a statement about something. And it has to be something that is your opinion that other people might disagree with. Right? That's what we're looking for here. You're going to write 2 of those. And it offers here principles for strong beliefs. They may pertain to your origin, exploring your family traditions or childhood lessons. They may pertain to your war story, driving you to either embrace or reject the horrors you encountered. Like, for example, if you did some stuff during the war that maybe you would never have thought that you would do before the war, did that become something where you say, I did such awful things during the war and now I refuse to ever engage in violence ever again, right? Or you could say, no, I learned it during the war that sometimes violence is what you need, right? Like, so you could have that go either way. Or they may pertain to your profession, the reasons why you practice your craft or the ethos it taught you. And so sample beliefs that it offers, you know, here as examples that you guys could absolutely just lift and use if you wanted, or come up with your own. But so the examples it offers here: family is a chain to be broken. Violence is the best teacher. Only the strong survive. Peace prevails. Mars Corp knows best. Humans are dangerous. The song is divine. Anger is a gift. Infections must be exterminated. Polvo yearns for liberty, or the Union can return. The Union is essentially like the Star Trek Federation, and it was basically the galactic organization before the war happened. So one additional note to consider while coming up with your beliefs. This is a mechanic that we didn't really talk about initially, but as the GM, I am responsible for representing the influence of the song and or the tormenta in whatever's going on, right? Sometimes it's going to be very low influence and it's really just people being people. Sometimes one or the other is creeping into the situation and you might not even know it, right? So I'm responsible for some of that. But because both of those things can literally infect and corrupt the psyche of the characters, one of the things that can happen is that when there is significant influence from either the tormenta or the song in a conflict, and you lose a conflict against, you know, an NPC, and so like I, as the GM, have won a conflict, what I can choose to do is essentially cede the results of that conflict and say, you actually do get what you want, but you suffer a moment of corruption. And what that means is I get to change one of your beliefs. And in general, the concept, the basic idea is that I would change it in a subtle way so as to reflect moving it in the direction of either the song or the tormenta as applicable, right? But the thing is, as a player, obviously you know that happened. But in character, your character is not aware that anything has changed. All they know is that they got what they wanted in a conflict. So, when you choose your beliefs, one of the things that could happen during the game is that you might find that your character's beliefs get, manipulated by the song or tormenta. Now, one of the other things that's important to consider also there is that it's never unilateral. Meaning, I'm not going to force on you a specific change that you don't like and are unhappy with. Right? This is all about us together telling a good story. I'm not going to force you to accept a belief that you don't like. Now, one of the things that we might consider is the difference between something that your character would not like, but could be fun for the player to play, right? But the idea is that if there is ever a case where my suggested change is something you really have a problem with, absolutely say so, and we will figure out what it should be. All right? And then that's where convictions come in. Because a conviction cannot be corrupted that way. And so, and how do you make a belief into a conviction? Well, recall on your character sheet that moment of growth. You know, once you've had 2 moments of discovery and you get to a moment of growth, that's where you can take a belief and make it into a conviction. And you can change it at that time. Like, you don't have to, you may decide that your new conviction is actually the opposite of what your original belief was. You can decide that at that time if you want.
May I have a conviction for my character?
Oh, to start with, it does
Yeah.
offer here that it's an optional thing to start with. I mean, I'm open to that. Tell me why.
Well, mainly it's my own personal preference. You know from our okay, I don't normally like horror games. I played Curse of Strahd with you, and trusted you with my tender emotions, and it paid off. So that's one of the reasons why I'm playing this, is because I trust you to run this, and I want. And one of the problems that we had in the course of that play was something very similar to this. Our party encountered a corrupting influence,
Yeah.
and our ideals and alignments were being affected by the environment. And that bothered me a great deal, and that bothered some of the other players. And you allowed us to kind of purify that in the course of play by taking some other sacrifices. And what I basically wanted to do is I wanted to establish a kind of okay, we can mess with these other beliefs, but I want there to be a core that isn't going to get messed with.
Right.
And it has. So this is not so much because I think it would be more fun for me if I understood that I've got that safe spot.
Sure, sure. Well, that's an excellent opportunity. That I think the next thing we're going to talk about is safety tools. So first of all, the answer is yes, you can do that. Mechanically, what that will mean is that in a scene where what you are confronting is your conviction as opposed to a belief, you first of all you get an extra die in conflicts where your conviction is involved, like that is related to that. But also, though, the flip side of that is that you don't get insight from confronting your conviction because you've already made your mind up on that.
Right.
Okay. So that's so I absolutely allow you to do that. But let's also talk a little bit about safety tools, and I think this book offers a couple of really useful ones that we'll want to all be aware of as we proceed. First of all, there is the X card, and it has even some sample text that I'll read now, which is to say, I'd like your help to make this game fun for everyone. If anything makes anyone uncomfortable in any way, just lift this card up or simply tap it. We'll figure out a way to do that on Roll20. You don't have to explain why. It doesn't matter why. When we lift or tap this card, we simply edit out anything that was X-carded. If there is ever an issue, anyone can call for a break and we can talk privately. I know it sounds funny, but it will help us play amazing games together. Please help make this game fun for everyone. Thank you. So that is the offered text here, and it has a link to linking to the more detail about that tool. Another one that it offers here is something that I hadn't ever seen before, but it's called Going Dark. And the idea here is it's a little bit like the idea of veils that are sometimes present in other games, where the basic idea here is this is a game of personal horror where memetic forces twist our minds, trauma lies around every corner. Going Dark is a tool that is specifically designed to produce those kinds of horror while enhancing player safety. So the idea here, and it notes that there's a caveat for it, but the basic idea here is at any point in time during play, anyone at the table can say the ritual phrase, "Then things go dark." And what that basically says, at this point we fade to black and assume that whatever happens next happens off camera, and none of the characters, PC or NPC, remember what happened next. And we essentially say, something happened, we don't know what it is, wake up in a different situation. And you could potentially explore what happened to the characters. But we could also just say something was traumatic, but I've blocked it out and I'm going to move on as though nothing happened. Now, one of the things that it does caveat there is we won't use that if anyone doesn't like it, because the idea of having unreliable memory or things happening to you that you don't remember could also make some people uncomfortable. So how do people feel about this one?
I guess I didn't read that section as closely because I didn't realize that it actually meant no memory of the thing. Huh. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. So, anyone have?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, no one has to use it, but the idea of having it in the game is that if anyone decides to use it, that is what happens to everyone in that scene.
Sure.
Okay.
It's a tool. I don't know if I'll ever use it personally, but it's nice a tool for if we get to an uncomfortable point for someone. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, kind of like montaging, almost. And then something happened, and now we're doing something else.
So,
Yeah.
So, and the other thing too, just related to these safety tools in general, is that although obviously, like, the principal concept of this game is that you've got this sort of scary situation with the song and the tormenta and what they are and what they're like and what they do, and that is kind of inherently scary, and it all lends itself to kind of a sci-fi horror game, and that is to some extent what I'm trying to play. I don't necessarily feel like we have to be 100% dark all the time. It doesn't always have to be depths of terror. You know, it can just be, you know, serious sci-fi dealing with real issues without necessarily being horror. Right?
I mean,
so,
if you want to think of a horror movie that it's not all horror, think of the Tremors movies. Like, there's some moments in there that are just absolutely hilarious.
oh yeah.
But
I would-
it's definitely a horror movie.
Well, I don't know. I would call Tremors principally a comedy, but
Yeah.
but
I
yeah,
mean-
it certainly blurs the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that movie. But yeah, the other element is that obviously we have something like the X card if anything is just like, if there's a moment where something's happening and you don't like it and you don't even want to talk about it. You don't want to have a conversation about why you don't want that to happen. You just want to say, no, that's not happening. I don't even want to have a conversation about it. That is 100% allowed and encouraged if you're ever feeling yourself in that situation. That's what the X card is for. Also, an option always is talking about it. And one of the things about this game compared to, like, as the GM, you know, we talked about actor mode and audience mode, right? As the GM, I am always in audience mode. But for every scene, everyone else who is in audience mode has just as much influence on what's happening in the scene as me. It is collaborative in that regard. Now, to some extent, like, you know, I'm going to be trying to shape things, but what we always want to encourage is that everybody is able to influence the narrative in that way. It is more collaborative by design than typically something like Dungeons and Dragons is. Because in Dungeons and Dragons, it's really intended more that the DM does all of these things and everyone else just plays their character. But in this case, it may well be that we're going to establish a scene where Epsilon is getting hassled by some peacekeepers who are off duty but giving her a hard time. And then what we'll say is that, okay, well, David and Paul's characters are not in the scene, so maybe what if they play those guards, right? And they're in audience mode, but you know we can have a scene like that, right? where it's not necessarily always me representing every single NPC, especially in cases where it's an NPC that doesn't necessarily have some specific part in the broader mystery, right? Where it's just like some guy who happens to be there or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then last but not least, what it suggests for what it calls words of hate is, first of all, the idea that it explicitly says any sort of real world slurs that exist in our real world, it definitively says, first of all, none of those are used anymore in the setting of this game. None of those are actually used in the real setting here. But there may be in the game times when, someone from Mars might want to say something derogatory about a Belter. And what it offers is, instead of feeling like pressured to come up in the moment with what that word was, you can just say, you're only defending them because you are a slur for Belters, where you literally, what you say is slur for Belters. Now, we can also choose to just not have that happen, right? Like, that's an option too, to just not have that be something that comes up. But that's just another offered tool there. Let's, hang on. All right, so with all of that kind of covered, who has beliefs that you want to talk about with your character?
I
I've
do.
got-
Kira.
I think we all do.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So I've got Nobilis. I've got your character sheet up here. So let's just talk about yours first.
Large settlements are dangerous. The more people you are in contact with, the greater your risk of being infected by the memetic viruses, and we just shouldn't be living that way.
I think that one definitely works.
And it is my duty to be the best I can. And that is part of, it's related to his conviction about family, but he's has ideas about right and wrong that he applies to himself. The reason that I didn't put them in there is because they're not really something he thinks about much. And this is not, and the best is like everything, the best morals, the best skills, the best health. He just wants to be at the pinnacle of everything that he can accomplish. And it is completely irrational. And so he, rarely takes any more rest time than what his family can convince him he needs. Because he always wants to be the best.
Maybe if I can suggest that you don't need the words "I can" on there, because I'm trying to think of scenes which would allow you to confront that particular belief, right? And best I can is easy to say, well, I do need this rest, so it's okay to sleep now. It is okay that person beat me because I did my best.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
But I mean, yeah.
I don't want to tell you what your belief should be. I'm just trying. It felt like the best I can is inherently.
How about this? It is my duty to be my best self.
Well, the criteria that I'm concerned about here is just that who would disagree with this?
Okay, so it's
And
not
what would the
controversial is the
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, okay, I'll think of something else and
Okay.
get back to you.
Sure.
But-
But for conviction, you've chosen.
I've chosen family, including found family is paramount now.
Yeah. All right.
And it has to do with his, just because of his war story being echoes, we're still under threat, and he feels like small cohesive groups are the best way to deal with that environment. So
All right,
yeah.
great. So let's move on over to Lee's character.
Okay. From her her origin story, she is still, even though she left that dispute behind, she still believes that Mars Corp is evil. It's everything that it does is just selfish and evil and wrong. And
Yeah, I mean, I think that one. Yeah, no,
they're
that one I
evil.
think makes sense because it's very straightforward. It's a declaration, and it's one that certainly lots of people would say, "Nuh-uh,"
Yeah.
right? And so, for example, a scene where you're up against, hey, look, it's a bunch of Mars Corp people who are handing out free food to orphans.
Okay, obviously they're trying to lure them into transport so that they can take them back and do something evil with them.
You don't immediately have to justify why your belief is maintained, because the point of the scene would be to say, how does your character react? But then we examine at the end, the question is not, how did you manage to hold on to your belief, which you could, but
Yeah.
the question would be, did this scene make you reaffirm that belief or question it? Right? So
Yeah.
you can 100% roleplay that, like, oh, you're inherently suspicious. Why would they be doing this? They always have some ulterior motive or whatever. But it might be that the scene resolves with you not discovering any sort of ulterior motive about it. And so the mechanic of the game is not always for you to find a way to always hold on to that belief, because sometimes what you may want to do is question it. So again, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just encouraging that we want it. It can go both ways, and part of that's part of the mechanic of the game is for the characters to be forced to examine their beliefs critically and decide whether they still think they're true based on what they experience, and or whether maybe they change their mind.
Yeah. And the other the other belief is from where she is now, and that's that I must build a better world with my own two hands.
Now that's a good sort of like position to hold, but it's again the same thing that I said with Nobilis is, who's going to argue with that?
Okay. I think I was thinking that she would be trying to get into everything, but let me consider that, and we can come back to it.
Okay. Yeah. So again, it's just something that I could offer along those lines, and you don't have to take this, but just what I'm thinking about is a better world will be built by Belter hands, right? Like if you believe that it's Belters that know how to do this right, like that would be something that you believe strongly, but other people might disagree with, right? Now, so that's just a thought. So the key is the belief needs to be something that can be challenged by a scene.
Okay.
And so the idea of just like, this is what I like to do or what I want to do is not necessarily going to ever have someone who's arguing with you about it.
Okay.
All right. Let's roll up and talk about Calvin Foley.
That is going to be kind of a point with the character. It says nobody or very few people actually know how to pronounce it.
All right.
Okay. All right.
So go ahead and talk about your beliefs.
From actually kind of stretching throughout his entire life is knowledge must be gained. But from his experience with the war, some sacrifices are too much.
Yeah, so that's something that could potentially produce a little bit of cognitive dissonance, right? Which is not a problem. But just the idea of like, well, knowledge must be gained, but what sacrifices you might have to make to gain it. So the idea that you might have some beliefs that have a little bit of conflict with each other around the edges is absolutely possible. Now, the one thing with some sacrifices are too much is it's again a little bit vague, right? Because it's kind of like just saying there should be a line somewhere. Probably everyone would agree that there should be a line somewhere, but the disagreement might be where, right? So,
Yeah.
So what would be a sacrifice that is too much? Like, what sorts of things are you unwilling to sacrifice?
Well, I mean, people's lives. If you, it's, even if someone volunteers to step up to the plate and, and take the bullet, basically, does it need to happen that way? I mean, if the question is this safe? Is this medicine safe or this technology safe? Isn't there some other way of telling, other than potentially killing someone?
Well, so one of the things that comes to mind there is the idea in Avengers Infinity War of we don't trade lives.
Yeah.
The idea is if you feel like the only way to save person A is to sacrifice person B, well, maybe the idea then you need to say, well, sacrificing person B is an unacceptable option, and so you have to keep looking, even if right now it seems like that's the only way, because you don't trade one person for another. Like that, and I'm not telling you to change it. I'm just like I'm trying to. That's what makes me think of. Right, so I would suggest you need a declarative statement that someone might disagree with, and so like some sacrifices are too much. I feel like anyone might say some are, but which ones? Right? Because there are a lot of people in the war who would have said, if I have to sacrifice 100 people to save 1,000,000, I will absolutely do that. Right? In fact, the project that your character worked on did that, right? So it's a question of like maybe it's a reflection of that is that that haunts him, and so that's why he feels now moving forward that that's no longer something he's comfortable with, right? So you want to think on that one a little bit? Are you?
Yeah, I'm putting something.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure. I'm not trying to like dominate it and tell you like, oh, this is what it has to be. I'm just trying to, because it's going to be part of all of our goal to try to make scenes that will force all of these to be confronted. Oh, lives are not currency. See, I feel like that is a good one because that is exactly something that some people would say, except they are.
Yeah.
And it's like, so it's one of those things is like, even if you think they should be or they should not be, the fact is they are, some people are going to say, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's, I think that's a good one. All right. So Paul.
Yes.
So I'm realizing that the text you've got doesn't show up super well on the screen, but I can see it. So it's
Is it a layers thing?
No,
it's
it's
the color.
You chose a grayish color.
Yeah, it's just a light color. It's pale against the background is all. It's fine. So you've got We Must Always Be Watching and Polvo Must Be Unified. So Polvo Must Be Unified is a good one, especially just because that's one that some people might say, that's the song talking, right?
Yeah.
What does unified mean, right? Does that mean we all have to march in line and wear the same color jackets? You know, right? You know, it's like, I think that's a good one. It's like, but at the same time, the idea of everybody just doing their own thing, not only is that potentially Tormenta influence, but it's also like, how do you accomplish big projects that way, right? So I could definitely, I think that one is great. So we must always be watching is one that I feel like, again, needs to be a little bit more like declarative, like a little bit more forceful. Like, what is the argument against we must always be watching?
I'm thinking of our two belters who are much more on freedom and independence. I mean, I'm much more. My character's much more in a much more hierarchical sort of.
Well, but on the flip side of that, though, Nobilis's character as a belter is specifically like defines themselves by being the person who's always on the lookout for signs of influence, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I'll have to
Now,
What's up?
so I think, I mean, I think there's something there, but it's just a question of
I mean, let me make a suggestion that comes from a different role playing game.
Okay.
Trust no one.
see, I would that like so that's definitely one where like you always be on the lookout for everybody. Like, oh, just because this is your best friend that you shared a beer with yesterday doesn't mean that today they're not infected. So you have to always be on the lookout, right? Like that could be, part of it. But what I was also kind of thinking is that like, what if this ties into like the whole Mars culture a little bit too, of like downtime or recreation is frivolous, something like that, right? Like the idea that people actually take time away to do things that are not actually constructive to the betterment of the community is wasted time and effort and puts us at risk, right? So something like that kind of goes along with the recreation weakens our community, yeah. And that's definitely something people would argue with, right? Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think a lot of people would argue with that, but at the same time, this feeling of like we don't have the luxury of people just hanging out doing whatever the hell they want. We have too much work to do and there's danger around every corner. We need people on alert all the time, right? Like I feel like you could make that case, but it's also one that people could argue. And then again, it's like you could have a scene where, you show someone who is, at their breaking point because they never take a break and they're always like, they're always so hyper focused on everything that they're literally becoming less effective because they never let themselves take a break. That sort of thing, right? And so encountering that sort of person might be something that would cause Alan to kind of say, am I wrong?
Am I right here? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good example. I think those are good. So do we have anyone who's kind of updated their?
Yep, I changed my second belief, and I added lone wolves starve,
Okay.
and that has like at least two different meanings to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you don't want to starve, don't be a lone wolf.
Right.
But if you insist on being a lone wolf, I see no reason to assist you with that.
Right. Yeah. I think that I think what I like about the combination of those two is that it's a little bit like what we were saying earlier with the idea that it's can be kind of interesting to have your beliefs have a slight little bit of blurry conflict with each other. And with yours, it's kind of like it's that what's the sweet spot, right? If too many people is bad, but it's also bad to be alone, well, okay, it's a small number, but how big is too big? And, okay, well, what if you have 3 people who only want to do things with each other and is that okay? Are those lone wolves because they don't want to interface with the larger community? the idea that it, that those two
Oh yeah,
uh, static with each other a little
they're
bit.
they're in tension with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And especially I like the additional second meaning there of just like, some people might say it's dangerous for old Stevens to just be living off by himself in that wrecked ship all alone. We really ought to try to convince him to come in and be part of the bigger community, because it's not safe for him to be out there. I'm worried about him. And whereas your character might be say, look, if he wants to be out there all by himself, I don't see why we should waste resources and put ourselves at risk trying to go out there and persuade him of something that he's already decided. If he doesn't want to be part of the community, then let him forge his own path at his own peril.
Right. That's exactly what Sasha would say.
All right, yeah, I like that. Whoops.
Thank you, Nobilis. You talking about yours helped me come up with mine, and we'll see if this passes GM muster.
So
And that is,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, individuality is freedom. Not I told you, you helped me come up with mine. Not necessarily being a lone wolf, but being able to express yourself as an individual, as opposed to the strict, regimented kind of conformity that Mars Corp kind of represents. They kind of build off each other.
Yeah.
That everything that Mars Corp is and represents is evil. Therefore, anything that is not Mars Corp is good.
I can already imagine a really good scene for this character. Something they've built or created becomes popular, and everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like, one of the things I like too is that we always want, like, one of the neat elements of this setting is the idea that you sort of have to be constantly on the lookout for corrupting ideas from both directions, right? Because on the one hand, the song wants everybody to be the same and to all unite in harmony, and nobody's any different, so nobody's unhappy because everybody's the same, and that whole sort of thing, right? But then, like, the Tormenta is the one that's it's more on the other, like, of you don't like it when I put my boots up on the table? Well, then fuck you. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to put my boots up on the table just because I know it makes you mad. Oh, you want to make something of it? That sort of thing, right? Where, it's like the idea of being so determined to do what you want to do, regardless of what anyone else wants, can start to be, like, slightly influenced by the Tormenta. Certainly it is a line of thinking that lends itself more to that sort of corruption, right? All right, so, and then I think, yeah, we had already talked through David's beliefs for Calvin. Yeah, so I think we got everybody's 2 beliefs, right? Okay, so the next step is for us to build our settlement. So one of the things that, excuse me, burping here. Oh, interesting, it didn't, there we go. So one of the things that it offers here is a number of sort of example settlements, right? And we can kind of choose what we want to do. So part of the idea here is that all of these different places exist on Polvo, but we're talking about where are our stories going to take place, where are our characters based, and where is, what is the headquarters, so to speak, for our story, which may occasionally influence and interface with the other locations, but where are we based, right? And so that's where some of these different examples come into play. But first, let's talk about settlement creation in terms of how it applies.
I've been looking at all these lists,
Yeah.
and I have to say that the other settlements have more interest, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to put a lot of because there's a lot more stuff they have to create if you use one of the ones off the off that extra list than if you
Oh,
just
yeah.
use one of the ones that's there.
Right. It has a list of ones that are all locations on Polvo, and then it has a couple that are locations if you decide you don't want the setting to be on the planet of Polvo. There are a couple of other locations that you could do, and then it also has as suggestions lots of other alternative places that you could do. But I'm going to suggest, yeah, as you say, for our game, I suggest we do one of those sort of pre-created ones that still has plenty of room for us to customize, but we don't have to invent the wheel.
Yeah.
So first of all, choose settlement is our step one. And so it says, normally you will select one of the 6 core settlements which are described in this chapter. So that's these here. So let's just talk about them a little bit. Just realizing that it looks like it's cutting off some of the language there. That's okay. So we've got Barley Mow, the farming community, Warframe Yard, a boneyard settlement, Fort Bly, which is a military outpost, Vermilion Exchange, a trading post, Daedalus Station, a research station, Port Thoth, which is a spaceport, and then I think those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the 6 that are based on the planet, and so the other 3 that it offers, the Ort line, which is kind of like an asteroid belt sort of place, not on the planet Polvo. Longfall, which is kind of another, it's a there's a little bit of a Cloud City influence here. It's kind of like the new capital for some human settlement there. And then the Sargasso, which is another sort of planet-based thing. But I'm going to suggest that we do one of those first 6, unless anyone is just dying to choose one of the others. So we can learn more about any of these, but are there any that just jumped out to someone that we want to look at more closely first?
Let's see.
I think my character can be appropriate in any of them, but he's not going to be comfortable in several of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't have a strong. It's like I don't have any strong opinions. Says in order to tell my story, we can or can't have any particular one. Though I think, because my character tends to phase outwards. So.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time imagining Calvin in barley mode because that seems very much low tech.
Sure.
Pastoral even.
We can go ahead and sort of, take that one out of consideration.
Yeah.
Given that there's 5 settlements and 4 of us, how about if we each knock one out until we got one left?
All right. Sure. So we've knocked out one. Lee, is there any of the remaining 5 that you would say not that one?
I'd actually knock out Fort Bly.
Okay. All right. So we're not going to do Barley Mow, not Fort Bly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Epsilon can go in either one of the others, but
Okay.
Fort Bly.
All right. So we've got Warframe Yard, Vermilion Exchange, Daedalus Station, Port Thoth. Do you have one that you would like to eliminate, Nobilis?
No, actually, I.
This was your idea.
No, I know. But one of the reasons that
I'm just teasing. It could just be preference, like.
Okay.
I mean,
all right.
On the flip side, we don't have to do that. You can just say, you know what, I really want to do this one. That's also okay.
I'm going to knock out Daedalus Station.
All right. So, Paul, we've still got Warframe Yard, Vermilion Exchange, Port Thoth.
Thoth.
Yeah.
So out of those three, the one I like the least, all three of those look interesting. The one I like the least, mildly less, is Vermilion Exchange.
Okay.
But I like all three, so
All right.
that's very mild dislike.
All right. So Warframe Yard and Port Thoth are the remaining ones, and so I'm going to just go ahead and say of those two, the one I find more interesting is Warframe Yard. So I'm going to eliminate Port Thoth. Is everyone okay with Warframe Yard?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
All right. Cool.
It-
So let's learn a little bit more about it then. So during the war, hundreds of vessels fell from the sky onto the surface of dirt, which is kind of the nickname for Polvo. This settlement was established in the midst of the rubble of the fallen warships. These boneyards are centers of salvage engineering and industry. The inhabitants of Warframe Yard try to build a stronger future from the wreckage of the war. So I'm going to, let's see, first remove that one, and I'm going to get Warframe Yard.
So maybe a little higher scale Jakku in some ways.
Yeah,
From
yeah.
the Force
There's
Awakens.
some of that. Like this is definitely big. Not just like big business from like a corporate standpoint, but just in terms of an important part of the, your settlement's infrastructure is focused around. Is focused around this here. I'm going to move your Roll20 screen onto this so that we can start adding text to this and so on as we need to. Because part of what we learn in the timeline, and we'll talk more about this, but like the end of the war was that like the Chorister fleet, which had lots and lots of ships infected with the song, was around in orbit of this planet when the Tormenta finally freed everybody. And so a lot of those ships blew up. Some of them crashed. A lot of them are still in orbit as space junk up there, right? And so the idea of salvaging what you can from those is not only like necessary, but to some extent it's also necessary from the standpoint that they're literally just physical hazards and need to be dealt with, right? On top of the idea of saving whatever you can. But also the idea of if you're salvaging a ship that was infected with the song, are there lingering remnants somewhere in there? Is everyone really gone? That sort of thing. So the idea of needing to salvage stuff is important. So the next step, once we've chosen the settlement, which we have here, is we select the industries. And what that means is there's 5 industries that it offers here to begin with. And all of those are technically happening, but we choose, as part of this step, we select 3 of them that are most prominent for our game. So again, the choices for Warframe Yard are salvage, arms, metalwork, electronics, and data mining. Sounds like we kind of already.
I would like to express a strong inclination in the direction of salvage.
Okay.
Yes, so did I. So did I. So yeah, I'm right with you on that idea.
I think that makes sense. We were just talking about it. All right.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 more that that we want to choose.
I like electronics because that's something that basically that's a good place for Calvin to sit.
Well, I would think that the data mining one is also very good for Calvin.
Yeah,
Information.
especially that whole knowledge
Yeah.
must be gained or whatever. I mean, but we could
Yeah.
also choose data mining. We could have those be the
Well,
3.
like I imagine like his focus more on the concrete, like the actual, like taking pieces and putting them together in the right ways to
Sure.
solve a problem.
All right. So arms, metalwork, data mining. We need one more.
Let's just go ahead and put data mining in there.
All right.
Okay.
And so that is one that is a little bit like I was saying, is that the song can be transmitted electronically. And for that matter, the Tormenta was communicated with nanobots. So
Yeah.
data mining definitely has the potential to expose people to both of those things if you're
Now,
not careful, right?
I would, yeah, I would like to point out that I mean, the other ones exist.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not.
Yeah.
We're deciding not to put them like front and center.
Right, yeah.
So-
Like we've got 3 that are most notable. The others are just more in the background.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing because I think that the metalwork one, where Isan Bagri's belief is family keeps us human, is a little too close to my character's conviction. So
Bear in mind
maybe it
these
would-
face characters don't so even though there's 5 and they're listed by the industries, don't automatically assume.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not. They're
okay.
a separate thing, a separate category of.
Oh, I thought they were tied with each.
No, I
okay.
understand why you would make that assumption, but that is not the case. It is a separate
Okay.
step that we're going to choose with those faces in a moment.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So, like, for example, just to illustrate that point, the first one is salvage, but then the next one, Farah the Tinkerer, is a belter or marshal who believes nothing is sacred. I mean, like, that could be associated with salvage, but not necessarily. But, yeah, so the next step, though, is answer questions. So our bottom here is we've got 4 questions that we need to answer for our version of Warframe Yard. Here, does someone want to take on typing in the text? I mean, I could do it, but if someone wants to volunteer, whatever we decide to just add it to the sheet.
I can do the typing.
Okay. So the first question: your settlement is partially built from salvaged warships which plunged from orbit. Which group or business has claimed the hull of the USF Defiant, which was one of the flagships of the original United Fleet, but then also the Chorister Fleet once it was infected? So basically,
Okay.
yeah, this is where we would
Nobody
say.
else has-
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
If no one else has a suggestion, I thought of something.
Okay.
Okay.
The artificial intelligence that was on board now runs it for itself.
Yeah, I was thinking something along the same lines as that rather than somebody or one of the groups claiming it, that it was taboo.
So
Because-
when you say taboo, what do you mean by that in this context?
Is that nobody goes near it, nobody touches it. It's seen as a threat because now it was the flagship of the Song Fleet, and so it's the biggest threat in.
Maybe it came down mostly intact, and unlike all the wrecks out there, and that makes people suspicious of it. But to say that nobody goes in, is I think goes too far.
Well,
you know-
right, like the premise of the question is that the settlement is partially built from salvaged warships,
Right.
right? So we could choose to not use that one, but then what that kind of really does is make, like, why would we build our settlement around a ship that nobody can go near?
All right.
I think honestly, the data mining thing, that a large warship would be kind of a perfect spot for data mining, because there, it would have communication, it would have, there's a whole, you'd imagine a space battle would have a whole host of, just like electronic attacks and defenses and such. So there'd be a suite of pieces already built in.
Also, just to add, I was actually wrong when I corrected you guys earlier that these faces are actually associated with the industry that they are next to. So I misremembered how that worked.
Yeah. I
There's
think
there's a
that
different thing that you do later that I was thinking of.
Okay.
But yeah,
yeah. I mean, like, I think there's a different the version of it of the sort of the core book that you gave us access to is different than this one because like the thing like this is arranged a little different.
okay. I mean,
Here,
I
just
I
pointing out.
literally have okay. Um. Oh yeah. Well. Oh. So yeah. No. Technically, what I've added to the I've added to the Roll20 here is a different PDF, but it's just the same
Oh, okay.
information.
Okay.
It's the same information. It's just got the text stuff on the left side instead of the right side. Is
Okay. I understand.
don't worry about that. But yeah, so we want to say that did we settle on the idea that Cena, the runner who heads up is involved with the data mining, has set up that operation primarily in the
In the
Defiant.
Defiant?
the
Yeah.
hull of the Defiant. Do we want to say that that's what this ship right at the top of our map is?
Nice
Yeah.
and proud
Yeah.
on
It's
the map. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
that looks like a crash flagship.
All right. Are you adding that, Nobilis? I
Yes,
can.
I am.
Okay, great. The text doesn't show up until you hit enter, so this way. Okay, great. So the next question then is, the world is sharp and cold, but your community has worked hard to make things better. How do you come together in warm camaraderie? And in particular, I think what it's kind of looking for in this question would be like, do you have festivals? Does everyone hang out at the pub every night? Or, it's like, how do people commune with each other here?
Frivolity. Bah.
Well, what popped into my mind for that is there's that big dead looking tree in the picture. It's like they have there's like a solstice, a Christmas celebration, and during that tree gets decorated and lit up. It's like a beacon basically, and how it when it's all finished. And it's like
Once a year is, and that's once a year.
Well,
That's the only time that they come together.
We
That
can
doesn't seem like
decide
enough.
that this planet actually has sort of the equivalent of it has more than one moon, so there's like different combinations of patterns.
it could like there's like each both
Solstices,
systems,
equinoxes.
like kind of
Here,
celebrating the cycles of the seasons.
here's another suggestion, and I think I'm just throwing this out there for everybody because, like I said, this is collaborative. There's no one dictating anything here. But what about the idea that when the original, like when the war ended, there was for a while these weekly updates that would be broadcast around all over the planet of giving like here's the biggest news related to things that everyone on the planet might need to know about, and also like saying still no sign of a resurgent fleet. Like the war, and it started becoming this thing like where every week they would say like it's now been 3 weeks since the war ended. It's now been 4 weeks since the war ended, and so on. And it started to just become this thing where it's kind of like once a week you have just this like, it's like this sort of fun. Everyone kind of has a little bit of a party too. So yeah, well, it's another week.
Once a week, someone ties something to the tree to celebrate another week of peace.
I like that. I think, do we have like a big party where that happens? Is it like a big ceremony, or?
Uh
Because one person just tying a thing to a tree is cool.
No,
I love it,
in-
but
in-
it's not
in-
necessarily everyone coming together, right?
well, there's a ceremony to it, and the real issue of it is how the person who's going to do it that week is picked. Right. That's so like I don't know if that's like
Kind of becomes
I don't
sort of
know
a
how-
glorified employee of the week sort of thing, but the whole community decides.
but it's like can't be the same person twice.
Until you've kind of gone around
and
the horn, so to speak, right?
and there's a bit of a like superstition is like what happens when everyone's done it.
Oh, so like the idea is that hasn't happened yet, and so you kind of
Right.
there's a little bit of like maybe it's not imminent or anything, because there's a fair amount of people who have been here, and it's not been that long since the war ended.
Right.
So yeah, maybe there is a little bit of a what if, because the idea of if that were to ever happen, it would mean that the community has stopped growing, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that. And so the idea is that is there some sort of a town council who picks from newcomers, or maybe it's always like it is the most recent arrival that week.
Or maybe not the most recent arrival, but the longest term, the person who's been there the longest who hasn't done it yet.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You have plenty of data mining to
That
track
actually
sort of thing.
plays into something that we're going to do in a moment, because there's actually mechanics that we're going to deal with in a moment that deals with what order you all arrived at Warframe Yard in. Yeah, so I kind of like that. Does everyone kind of like that? So
Yeah.
so it's always going to be whoever's been there the longest that hasn't done it yet. They tie something to the tree that's probably usually small, right? Like you're not tying like big 40-pound weights to a tree branch, probably, right?
Right.
Is
So
it the
something
same
that Paul
time?
probably has along the way at some point.
Right.
It's the same type of thing each week.
Well, I would imagine it is to be determined by that person. Like, what did they want it to be? But maybe there's patterns of it. But like, I would imagine that everyone gets to decide that week, right? Like when it's their turn, they
And sometimes they make a big speech or have a song or something like that. And sometimes it's just some old curmudgeon who just takes an old scarf and wraps it around a branch and walks away.
But
So-
but maybe there's something to like this. Maybe this could be a tradition where like there's no weekends here because everyone's kind of working. But maybe it's kind of just understood that once a week, Saturday afternoons, everybody takes off work because in principle you might be going to this ceremony, but everyone kind of just is theoretically allowed to not work at that time, except of course there are things that have to still be done, and so maybe there's tension between the people who still have to do their job anyway, jealous or annoyed at other people, or what do you think?
Or maybe the ceremony is the start to a day of rest.
Well, so that's
Yeah.
along the lines of what I was thinking, but
Yeah.
my concern is that things like people who are, guarding the gates and things like that, like you can't have everybody resting,
Right.
right? So that's part of what I was saying is that like in theory you have sort of the equivalent of a day of rest, but the problem is really that there are some people who some people whose jobs can't really be put on hold.
Right. What if the rest time runs from the morning broadcast of the news until the evening where the person ties it on the tree and then everybody goes to then. So during the daylight hours,
Well,
and that could it you know to work in both ideas for the weekly broadcast, and that's how they determined, well, when are we going to do this? Well, we'll do it when, the evening after they do the broadcast.
I'm not
No,
sure.
never mind.
Okay, no,
Don't worry about it.
No, I like this idea of the day of rest, though. I'm just trying to see, like, what are the complexities of that? Because, for example, lots of people might want to take their day of rest to go to a bar, but the person
Yeah.
running the bar doesn't get to rest, right? Or
Right.
what about the people who are guarding the gates to make sure that monsters don't attack, or that infiltrators don't come in, or that the song isn't starting to take hold somewhere, right? Like, those people
Yeah.
can't take that time off. So what if, how about this? How about this? What if there is an element of the culture, and like none of this is like rigid. This is sort of just like, it's what people do as opposed to any kind of a rule or law about it. But the idea is that those who can take the time off do, but part of what you're kind of supposed to do is go do something nice for someone who can't take the afternoon or day off.
Yeah, I like that.
Community service of a way.
And maybe it's like maybe if like you have a job where you're not needed like every day. It's like one of the things like, oh, I'll take over for you today, or on one of these other days when I don't actually have anything I need to do, I'll take over for you so you can have a day of rest. It's just not the same day of rest as everybody else.
Well, that raises the idea, though, that this person would have some other day that they don't need to work, right? So, well, here's a question about that. This is something that we can decide. How busy and how desperate is life here? Do people have time to take time off? Or is everyone pretty much have to work every day because there's just that much stuff that needs doing?
I don't want it to be that bleak.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in fact,
I mean, it's
people are more likely to get in trouble when they've got some time.
Okay.
On their
Okay.
hands,
So people do have leisure time.
Right. If there was no leisure time, then my belief wouldn't make any sense because nobody's ever taking time off
Sure,
anyway.
sure.
because
Okay.
No one can.
So people do have, leisure time that varies depending on personal inclination and occupation. But we have once a week, I feel like maybe it doesn't need to be a whole day if people have leisure time elsewhere. But again, it's like, what if there's the noon broadcast, but the idea is nobody ever expects anything important to get done after that broadcast on that day.
Right.
People
that
can
sounds right.
work, but there's lowered expectation. A lot of people just kind of will take that as sort of special afternoon to go do something fun. There's the big ceremony at the tree that you either go to or not, depending on how you feel about it. That sort of thing. I like that.
Yeah.
And then I think probably everybody who ties something to the tree might have their own sort of different feeling about why they choose what they choose. But obviously, whoever is choosing would be doing so with the knowledge that, this is something that's going to stay up there and be seen by everybody.
Right.
So
And-
probably a lot of people would have it be something like a memory of what's been lost in the war or something like that.
Could be, or something representing some hope for the future, or I definitely see someone putting something up there to declare their love for someone else. It makes everything really awkward. I mean, there's all kinds of.
So
And then you got the people who are basically trolls and put something that's like not necessarily in good taste.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that like there are no rules about it, and the person who is chosen, I would say, gets the ultimate right to decide. Maybe with the one caveat that it can't be something that's like dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the other. Well, so let's finish the questions that are there before we start talking about other questions. But I like that a lot. So the next question though is: the Boneyard is a dangerous place. What is the collective name for the orphans who run through the ruins after having lost their parents in salvage accidents?
The Riven.
No, the Riven already has a name in the game.
Yeah,
Is it?
the Riven is the nickname for the one alien species that has.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's where I got. That's where I pulled out of my bad.
Skitters.
Bitlings.
I was going to say Jetsam.
Jetsam has a nice sort of salvage quality to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
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 You know, just these left
That's-
behind pieces of disaster.
And yeah, come over here. I nearly ran over some jetsam. That
Yeah.
that makes sense.
All right. I feel that
Okay.
like that question is less of a world building question and more of a here, name this thing that we're declaring is true about your setting.
Yeah. The definition of jetsam is unwanted material or goods that have been thrown overboard from a ship or washed ashore.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. All right, and then the fourth question here is, which of the neighboring core settlements have recently harmed your community, and how did they do so? And so those
Ooh.
neighboring core settlements are basically like the other ones that we were choosing from. So I can pull that list back up if anyone wants to see that. So what we had was Barley Mow, Fort Bly, Vermilion Exchange, Daedalus Station, Port Thoth. So farming community, which probably supplies a lot of our food, right? Military outpost, which, you know, straightforward what they would do. Trading post, Vermilion Exchange, Daedalus Station, Research Station, Spaceport, Port Thoth.
The most straightforward one that I think of, which I think is useful in the sense of put it out there and then discard it for something more creative, is that someone at the Vermilion Exchange cheated us.
Okay.
That's like
Yeah.
that's like the most obvious one that comes to mind, and which means I want to think of something more creative.
Well,
Yeah.
so
I would.
we
Port
would definitely.
Thoth.
Okay,
They
go ahead.
they had a like, you know, there are some ships and some military ships that they were taking the weapons off of, and instead of doing the usual deal of we'll pay the salvage thing, people from Fort Thoth just came in and took the military equipment.
Are you thinking? So Port Thoth is the spaceport versus Fort Bly, which is the military.
Fort Bly,
outpost?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they
And-
basically just came in and said eminent domain on the weapons systems for some of our salvage, and instead
Yeah.
of saying,
Well, how about, in order to make it a little more kind of like a little more nuanced, there's a crashed ship, right?
Mhm.
People from our section, people from our town, people from Warframe Yard found it, started salvaging it, and Fort Bly came in and said, no. This isn't a crashed ship from the war. This was our ship that just crashed, and so we're taking it. And people in Warframe Yard think they're lying, but so yeah, they took it. But I want to make it a little more nuanced as to, you know, what their
well,
motives were.
here's the thought. we chose that arms was not one of the industries that we were highlighting for Warframe Yard. So maybe what that means is that we don't really have someone in town who's expert at dealing with the arms. And so our longstanding practice has been that we sell those to Fort Bly. Like that's what we have always done, is that they are pretty much our exclusive buyer for those sorts of things. But
or here's another option, is that the kind of the unnegotiated tradition is that we scrap everything. We take all the scrap that isn't weapons because they can be really dangerous and people get hurt, and then they come in later and take that. And they didn't wait.
Yeah, so maybe there has been generally an agreement. Oh, yeah, how about this? Along that same line. So maybe there has always been, we go in and we salvage everything except the weapons, and then we tell them, we flag it, we say, okay, this one is ready, we've cleared it out, made things, ready for you to go in and retrieve the weapon systems yourself. And so not only are you sort of like, it's sort of a symbiotic sort of thing, but they have started claiming that we're actually taking some of the weapons for ourselves. And so now they're insisting that they get first, like they move in, they take the weapons first and then decide what to leave for us, because they are accusing us of taking some of the weapons for ourselves, which might be true, right? But that now our concern is when they go in first, who knows what valuable stuff they might be taking that we would have otherwise gotten under the other original agreement.
Especially electronics and data, which we really want.
Right.
We're afraid they're taking them from us.
Yeah, and especially if they insist they get to go in first, we don't even know what might be there that they're taking.
Yeah.
So, but then again, so I like that idea, but so as far as recently harmed our community, like, do we want it to just be that they have now made this declaration, or do we
they've
want
actually
to say,
done it.
or like there was a recent incident where they actually repelled our scavenger team by force. Like they came in when our scavenger team was getting ready to start. They came in and said, no, you can't do it. It got heated because this was a change in the status quo. And they repelled our salvage team by force, injuring several people.
Yeah.
I like that part, the repelling by force.
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean anyone was killed, but it was basically like, not only are we claiming that this is our right to go in first and take it because you guys have been cheating us, is what they're saying, but also if you resist our doing that, we will beat you back. Mm-hmm. And they have the superior fighting forces because that's what they do.
Yeah, I can see Epsilon not liking that one little bit.
Yeah.
I think all of us have issue with this idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Different ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like that.
What I wrote was there has always been an agreement with Fort Bly that Warframe Yard, between Fort Bly and Warframe Yard, but it's breaking down. We used to salvage wreck first, leaving the weapons for Fort Bly, but now they've decided to reverse the agreement. There was a big argument that turned into a fight.
Yeah. I
People
like
were
that.
hurt.
Yeah. So, so we've answered those questions. One of the other questions that I feel like came up a little bit earlier, but even though it's not like specifically listed there, is, do we have like a town council or something? Or is everybody kind of just free for all? Like everyone's kind of loosely organized, but mostly doing their own thing? Or do we have people who are in charge or what?
I mean, reading the book, it suggests that lots of settlements have mayors, but we don't have to necessarily do it that way. But that's the
Right.
kind of default I was running in my head.
Yeah, so like that's an option, but we can there's nothing there's no specific structure forced on us. Like if we were deciding to be Fort Bly, that would specifically suggest a military hierarchy, right? But
Yeah.
Warframe Yard, a bunch of scavengers, salvagers doesn't necessarily like it could be more like
Maybe.
like Deadwood, right? You know, like sort of a gold rush town.
Yeah. Maybe it's
Maybe-
but like the leaders of the specializations, like the salvage party leader who organizes the salvage teams.
Oh, yeah,
And
so-
then the electronics, the person who organized the electronics development and refinement and that kind of stuff. And then the data miners, and then maybe all of those come together to form kind of like a guild council.
Right. Well, what I was actually just going to say is because we have these faces associated with the three main industries, maybe it kind of started informally, but the general sort of way things have happened is that anytime some sort of decision, question comes up where it seems like the community has to make a decision as opposed to just people doing whatever. It is those three that kind of come together, and because they are sort of the faces of those three most important industries, they kind of have the clout that if the three of them come together and agree on something, who's going to be able to argue? Because all the most important people in the community will have decided.
And
Yep.
and there's a tradition that if a particular question falls clearly within one of these groups, that the leader of that group is the one who
Yeah.
makes the decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. That it's like those are the three that are like if a salvage question comes up, which I would guess because of the electronics and data mining are kind of salvage adjacent, maybe that just talks about like just the physical stripping and manipulation of the hulls as opposed to
Right.
like
Yeah.
the content of the the pieces being pulled out. So like if you're salvaging a big fuel tank, that's Farah the Tinkerer's charge. But if you're pulling out the computer, targeting systems, that's Talus for the electronics that would be more interested. But if you're searching the databanks for old star charts, that's going to be Cena the Runner. Is that
Yeah.
And
and
so the council only gets together when there's a big question.
right? Yeah, it's like there's not a routine thing with formal business and people taking minutes. It's more like when something comes up that it seems like is too big for any one of those people to just handle, and it seems like something's going to affect more people than just that industry. That's when the three of them would have sort of like a special meeting, which probably just consists of them, talking it out over dinner or something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So step 4, show the faces. Each of the industries is represented by a non-player character known as a face. Each of the core settlements lists sample face characters, giving them names, jobs, and beliefs. And so this is where we're just going to talk a little bit more about each of these people. So, like, if we're just going to use the ones that are on here, which is what I recommend for this game, honestly, let's just say, so Farah the Tinkerer is a Belter Marshal who believes that nothing is sacred. So a Belter Marshal is, raises a question of Nobilis's character. What was your character's name again?
Sasha.
Sasha, yes.
Sasha.
Yeah, so that would just immediately raise a question of like, do they know each other? Well, so let's go ahead and hybridize steps 4 and 5. So step 5 is form relationships, which is each player looks at the three faces that we have focused on here and decides which of these their character has a close relationship with. Perhaps they were childhood friends who fled the ruins of Earth together. Perhaps they served together during the war or fell in love. And then, so basically, you are going to choose one of those that you specifically have a close relationship with.
I think that served with Farah the Tinkerer is perfect for my character.
Is Farah at the U.S. Defiant, or is that Cena?
Right. It was the data mining operation that was
Oh,
in
okay.
Defiant.
Sorry.
That's right.
Right.
And then locations is also going to have a couple of additional things in there. But yeah. So yeah. So Sasha was a marshal with Farah back before the war.
Yeah, yeah. And given that I want Sasha to be kind of young, she's the one who kind of trained him.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Do you think that they did they separate during the war, or
Yeah,
were
well,
they?
just torn apart by the chaos. You know.
Okay. Well, Sasha volunteered to be part of the. Wait, no. What did Sasha do? It was Sasha was doing the recon, which sent them all over, right? So
Yeah.
so they would have lost connection, and maybe it was just a pleasant surprise to discover when you kind of found yourself washing up on Warframe yards. Sure.
Or Sasha landed on Polvo, and then just started looking up anybody that he had known,
Oh yeah, there you
one
go.
name
And
after another, and said, "Wait a minute."
yeah, maybe came specifically because Pharaoh was here.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that's fun. So what kind of person is Farah, you think? Believes nothing is sacred. They work salvage, so we know those things.
Yeah.
They grumpy or they snarky?
Um.
It's okay. We can come back to that. We don't have to decide all this right away. It's I think but I think because we're establishing this is a character that someone's gonna someone's probably gonna play as an NPC at some point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of like nothing is sacred sounds really, really cynical, and I want to contrast that with a cheerful demeanor.
Yeah. Well, there's a philosophy that's it's like I don't remember exactly the name of it, but it's something like optimistic nihilism.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was after.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, if nothing we do matters, then the only thing that matters is what we do.
Right.
That sort of thing. Okay. Yeah. All right, and also I'll add though that as we talk about forming these relationships, it is totally okay for more than one person to have a relationship with the same face character. We don't have to have like one for each or anything.
Kind of given that there's 4 of us and 3 of them.
Well,
Yeah.
right. I'm just saying there's no don't feel pressured like if it doesn't make sense somehow. Like that one, like it just there was an easy, obvious one that's just like, hey, what if this, right? But okay, so let's next. Talus is a Mercurio, so that's an alien, but it's an alien that like can change their face and appearance and personality even. But they believe that money is freedom, so that's kind of a mercenary sort of.
A mercantilist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely, given that the word freedom is in both Talus's beliefs and Lee's character, I definitely want to know if there's a relationship there.
I don't know.
I mean, there doesn't have to be. I mean,
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a positive
because
relationship either.
individuality is freedom versus money is freedom. There's maybe some overlap in that Venn diagram, but mostly it's in the idea of freedom as a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
Because the path to money freedom versus individuality freedom is often not going to be the same path.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that Epsilon has a relationship with Talus.
All right, and that's fine. So let's just so we also have Cena the runner is a belter verger, which verger for because we didn't cover that one in any of you guys, but a verger was wait so the wanderers that were the vergers. You were one of the wounded and impoverished souls who searched the belt for solace or meaning. You took freelance jobs to help where you could, but you never let yourself grow too attached. You knew how to survive alone in the dark. So that's who Cena the runner was before the war. So there may be someone that's a little bit like, you know, like they have maybe some of those lone wolf tendencies. You know, like they're here, they're doing their thing. Information wants to be free, so they feel like they have to do what they have to do in order to make sure that the information gleaned from these salvaged ships doesn't just get swallowed up by the corporations who will profit off it and keep it secret and that sort of thing. And so to that extent, they make sure they're in the place where they can have some influence over that, but maybe otherwise don't necessarily.
I
Yeah.
feel like Calvin Calvin works on the electronics that comes in a salvage. But I feel like Cena would be like, would often be like, come in and try and say, hey, can I have try and be buddy and say, can I have access to information you found, or that kind of thing. It's like, and is this actually something meaningful? Like does Cena want to make a meaningful relationship, or is this just, hey, can I get what you have so it can be sent off? Or
I'm not sure I'm following. Like, what?
I mean,
How is that? Is that like a close relationship that they ask for stuff, or?
well, it's like my thoughts. It's like it's very common for Cena, like, she try and go to Talus, but Talus is like, basically money. If you want this, you pay. So you might try and sweet talk Calvin, basically, and it's like, and Calvin might be
So
just
what I'm going to
confused.
offer is
normal.
that is something they do, which is not necessarily the relationship, right? Like, just they come to you and try to sweet talk Calvin. Like, that's not a relationship. That is behavior from one party, right?
Okay.
So what I would say is, like, are they friendly? Are they flirty? What, like, what we want is this for this to be a close relationship, not the context in which you encounter them 2 or 3 times a week, right? It is you have a close relationship, however you want, to one of these characters, and I feel like what you described doesn't sound like that to me yet. Like, if they bonded over something and they find that they really enjoy drinking beers together and talking shop after work or something and hanging out, and that's where the context where they sometimes ask for information. But again, like, I feel like what we're establishing here, though, is that Cena the runner is in charge of the important data mining industry of the town. They're not someone who's just casually saying, hey, can I have this? Can I have that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, okay.
they're in charge of the data mining. So if anything else, I would think it would be Calvin that would be asking Cena for data to study, right? Because the Cena is in charge of
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So it'd be like, so So actually, she would go to Talus because they would have an understanding that they're both in charge, and they need to have a okay have a
Well,
relationship to
yeah, I would think that
make them work.
there's definitely got to be a partnership in the sense that
Yeah.
probably the data is coming from electronic devices, and so. But here's the other thing of the electronics in this context, which I'm gonna offer this as something that I feel like maybe simplifies that question a little bit. Talus is not salvaging electronics. Talus is in charge of building electronics from salvaged materials.
Okay.
Right.
Does that, like, how do people feel about that? Because I feel like that makes them less overlappy with the other two industries.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was always clear to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Building new stuff.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of just who gets what piece of the ship. It is more a matter of salvage. Farah the Tinkerer with salvage is the one who's sending people in to cut these husks of ship apart and put all the pieces in the right stack.
Put them in a truck, bring them back.
Right. And so the things that have data in them are going to go to Cena for recovering that. But I would think that data mining also is not necessarily just about getting data from those old drives, although I think that would be related. But it's also just going to be about collecting data from any source and gleaning useful material from it. And so that could be tracking telemetry from the ships still in space junk or decaying orbits, and knowing, like, this is when we're going to have a ship crash down to the surface at this location. That's the sort of thing data mining tells you, right? And so I think that that's makes those three industries not step on each other quite so much.
Right.
Yeah.
And then electronics is more about, like, actually making devices useful to other people as opposed to just pulling existing stuff out of the wreckage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like taking the navigation system from something designed for military use and turning it into something that's more suited to civilian.
Right.
Or to a
Or maybe not. I mean, it's not like there's no military anymore.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it could be, for example, that, like, oh, well, everybody in town needs to have their own little personal communicator so that they can stay in touch when they're traveling around and going on these things. And oh, well, so-and-so Talus has just introduced a new higher power one that's going to be able to stay in touch even when you're down in the depths of a reinforced hull, and it won't lose its signal. And she buys, she's actually in the market to buy a bunch of these salvage transistors, because she can use them to make these other things, right? And, like, that's what she does, is she's not in there cutting the electronics out. She's the one making stuff from salvaged electronics. Okay. So she would buy from Farah, but then and then Cena would occasionally be examining drives, gleaned from Farah, but also just evaluating data from all sorts of things and doing it for, like, weather prediction and just, like, trying to be the farmer's almanac for Warframe Yard.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Does that work for everyone?
Yeah.
Does that help us? So obviously we established Sasha had the relationship with Farah already. Did anyone else have thoughts about theirs?
I think maybe Epsilon has a relationship with Cena, in that she's Cena's eyes in the salvage team, in one of the salvage teams that steadily goes out, so that she's the one that keeps an eye out for the electronics. So she might work specifically for Farah, but she's actually on the team as a representative of Cena, so Cena would be her boss.
Okay.
So does that work as a close relationship?
Yeah, although I would encourage you to make it more personal and not just be, oh, this is my boss and I bring stuff to them and this is what I do for them. But like, what's the relationship like? Do you like her? Do you hang out? What do you talk about? You know, did you have any background together, or how did you hook up into this situation? Right? Like,
Well,
what's the personal
yeah.
detail for it?
I think that I think that we would get along real well and be very friendly. She was a verger and I'm Bradley Weeps. So definitely there's a point there from the wanderer and then the rebel. We had a certain offshoot perspective on Belter life that probably lends itself real well, and then having to come down, and now we're settled on solid ground instead of in an asteroid field.
Yeah. So why do you care about them? You can think about
I
it. You
think
don't have to,
yeah. Let me
like-
think. Let me think about it. But that's kind of the way
Right. But
I kind of want to go.
so, from a narrative standpoint, what we're looking for here is something with emotional stakes,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
That we want there to be a reason why your character would be sad if so and so suddenly got blown up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sad or angry, or for all we know, it could also be a negative relationship theoretically.
Yeah.
Although I
Right.
think the intended thing here is that it's a positive one, but it doesn't have to be. You actually could have it be, you know, we're bitter exes, you know, or
No, I think it's just that we became friends because we were belters that were on the edges of that society. We bonded over that. We're friends, and so that's
Longtime friends.
longtime friends. It's just been a thing.
did you know each other before the war, or is it just since
I
you've
think
been
so.
here?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, have you got any thoughts, more thoughts on yours, David, as we've kind of
So
the discussion?
relationship with Talus.
Okay.
It's there's the professional one. Calvin helps with designing things. Like Talus provides the materials. Calvin provides helps provide innovations. But it's Talus is a Mercurio, which means that his mind works in just is in some ways just so alien that it can't help but there can't help but be friction between the two.
Okay. So
And it's like they've found their own level to work together, but it's like kind of a constant tension.
one, let me toss in here just a question. There can be friction, but I would think that one of the things that a Mercurio probably does usually is adapt to whatever the people they're working with want in order to avoid friction.
Yeah, I mean, why would you? Yeah,
Well,
So that doesn't
Doing
mean
that.
there isn't friction between you two, but I would want to know why is that if usually Mercurios would avoid that.
I have an idea. Maybe Calvin feels threatened because Talus is better at making making improvements and such, and so the or
well, Well,
Calvin believes he can do a better job, but Talus won't listen.
well, it's like maybe Talus is believe his money is free, and it's like, but it's you know Talus is so focused on money. It's like, and Calvin is focused on just knowledge and learning and discovering. Like, so it's like yeah, I could do that if you just give me that challenge. I could do it if you just give me the budget for it. But it's like, well, you have to do it. You have to do it this limitation.
Okay, but it still seems like you're focused on where sources of conflict would arise between them, as opposed to why do you care about them? And care,
Like,
generally, I would think, is more than they sometimes interfere with what I want to do.
Well, it's like my thoughts. Every researcher has to deal with the budget department.
Right. But you don't generally consider yourself to have a close relationship with the people who are asking you to submit receipts. Right? Now, what if I mean, I'm going to toss this out, and you don't have to take it, but it could be that friction is an ongoing concern, but that maybe it was like, did your character have a hard time figuring out where to go or what to do after the war, given the sorts of experiments he was involved with? He was a little bit at a loss because he kind of knew he didn't want to do that anymore, but he was a little bit lost, and maybe it was Talus that said, I have a way that you can help make things that make people's lives better. And if you come work for me in Warframe Yard, you can find a new purpose there. And that does not mean that you always get along with them or agree on every point. And it may be that your daily interactions consist of quite a bit of bickering on things like that. Huh. But maybe the reason you care about them is because they were the one that like suggested this occupation for you and welcomed you and gave you a place to stay. And what do you think about that?
I like
They're
that
the sixth
idea.
Doctor and you're Perry.
Huh?
They're the sixth Doctor and you're Perry. You have a relationship, but it's sometimes vitrolic.
Okay, I'm not super familiar with those with the Sixth Doctor, so yeah.
That's fine. You don't need to be.
Yeah.
Fair.
You really don't.
But yeah, so like, see, that's I think what we're kind of looking for these relationships is it's one thing to say we bicker when we talk, but the question would be, why do you keep talking to them then? If it's so friction, why wouldn't you go do something else where you don't have friction? And it's, certainly we all have jobs, but again, it's like you wouldn't, when you're complaining about your job, you don't usually talk about your close relationship that makes you really care about your boss, unless there's something else there, in which case the question is, what is that thing? Right? But
Okay.
if you like that idea, I definitely, I think that works, is that, you don't always agree on everything. You come at this occupation from different places.
I mean, like my real question is like, how hard would it be to pick up route or pick up and move to a different settlement? It's like that's kind of, it's like, why, it's like the question people talk, say when they're that one of the responses when people talk about how hard they have it at their jobs, like, well, why don't you just leave? It's like, well,
okay, but that's not really the question. My point was, the whole concept of this step is what we're doing is we're trying to have a character that you have a close relationship with, and I kind of bicker with my boss sometimes is not really
okay.
the vein of what we're looking for. That's my point.
Yeah.
You know, so it's one thing to say, if that's your relationship with Talus, that could 100% be all that is. But then the question would be, okay, but who do you have a close relationship with?
Okay.
So saith Rocket.
So, but
Yeah.
so like if you like that idea, then I like it too. But what that would mean is, I think that when you bicker with Talus, which can happen a lot, it would still all be in the context of you owe Talus for kind of giving you a place to be and work to do that means something to you. And even if you don't always agree on it, on how to proceed with it, and you think that they're a little bit more mercenary than you would always appreciate, but nonetheless, you're here because of them, right? Like that, and I don't want to force you to have that be the thing. I'm just saying, like, that's the sort of personal, meaningful connection that I think is what we're looking for.
Yeah, and like that does make sense, and it's like, and maybe might have started his first, at the start his goal was just let's figure out, let's start saving up some money to move somewhere else, and then it's like, but then the bickering kind of became maybe more back and forth of enjoyment kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. It could be
verbal
like
sparring
friendly
instead of
bickering.
just-
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's try to go ahead and keep moving. Not to give you short shrift, Paul, but let's try to keep moving, and then we can refine all of these over the next week. So Paul, do you have a thought for your character's relationship?
I've been bouncing around between the three of them because I'm looking at the settlement now thinking about it. This is a relatively anarchic settlement in some ways. I mean, it's run. I mean, the three people are two belters and an alien. I'm a little bit of a weird cog in this settlement. I'm so sorry. I figure out, well, which of these three would I actually have a strong relationship with? I must, because that's the way the thing runs.
Well,
I mean,
it does raise the question of, this does not seem a very Mars-like settlement.
No, it does ask questions of why am I? Well, how did I wind up here? And maybe that when we get to the point of who was here last, maybe I'm the most recent arrival for reasons that I haven't decided yet. But I mean, I what's that?
What was your character?
He's the
I'm the pilot.
Martian pilot.
I'm the Martian pilot.
It's like maybe part of finding new wrecks and such is air.
Well, air transport. Well, that's a professional relation. That's a professional relationship, which makes sense. But I'm trying to figure out the personal relationship. Which of these three are the most would potentially be the most aligned to me? And I would normally say, well, maybe Farah, but optimistic nihilist does not sound like anybody I'm going to have a strong personal relationship with.
Well, but here's the thing is that it does make sense that there would be some professional connection to Farah, because they're the one that's most likely to be dealing with moving big things from one place to another.
It needs somebody to pilot that. Yes.
Right. And so there might be a professional relationship there. It does not have to be the personal one.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. The personal doesn't quite work necessarily unless.
Okay. Let me put this to you. Mm-hmm. This is an anarchic settlement. Everybody here is just this free-spirited, banging around against each other. But there's one person that when you come into their presence, they immediately are the kind of person you can talk to, and that's Talus, because they can adapt their personality to be comfortable with you.
To my structured want strong.
Yeah. Did you watch Deadwood?
I've watched a few episodes of Deadwood.
Because
Nothing hard.
I think to some extent we've got a little bit of an analog here in the sense that this might be a little bit like a kind of a gold rush town, right? Is that this is where people have kind of set up shop to make use of the titanium there in them thar hills, but that Talus is the one who is not necessarily like, so you get lots of the prospector type people living in the town, but Talus doesn't do that stuff. Talus says, no, I have them do the hard work and then I sell their stuff and then I make new stuff for them, but I get to stay at my nice comfortable shop and I optimize and enhance and all of that sort of thing. And maybe there's an aspect that from the Martian culture, it's not for money, but the idea of doing things efficiently and with precision is something that you appeal to, and maybe that element of Talus works for you. But again, getting along with them is not necessarily the close relationship we're looking for, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a long backstory. It could just really be, they are the only person in town that I can stand to talk to for 5 minutes.
Yes, because they could actually understand me. But in the midst of all these anarchists, they could actually give me enough of a mirror that I could actually feel like a Martian again.
Yeah, so it could be a close relationship in the sense of like, they are like an oasis in this town that you feel like you have such a hard time relating to anybody else, but it's just easy to talk to Talus. You don't always agree on everything, but they're easy to talk to. They get what you're saying.
They get me because that's what their species does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I'll go with it.
I've forgotten your character's name.
Alan Cross.
Alvin.
Alan, sorry.
Alvin.
Alan.
Alan.
Okay.
Alan. It
Alan,
did
got
sound
it.
like you were
Okay.
saying Alvin.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So everyone's kind of got their relationship there. So you've actually been writing that stuff in the location spot, which is
Well,
fine.
it's not a whole lot of room, so.
Well, no, there's actually an entirely different sheet that we're going to put that information on.
Okay.
So that's fine. In fact, actually, it's just as well. Let me put us all on that sheet so you can go ahead and
Retype all that information.
Yeah, I'm going to add. So this is where some of that stuff actually goes. Where, you know what? I will fill this out later. Let's not even worry about this right now. Uh-oh. I got a little dog with a tummy ache here. You know what? I think this is where we're going to call the stream to close. We're going to be checking in on some of this stuff as we continue over the next week. But the goal will be to finalize all this stuff, recap everything at the beginning of next week, and then actually play some of the game. How's that sound for everybody?
That sounds great.
Fantastic.
Okay.
On it.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. We'll be back next week to play some more After the War. And I got to go rescue my dog.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.